If you have a national problem, it only calls for a national solution. So if you want a global solution, you need a global problem. Every time I see a Tesla, I want to pull the driver over and demand my $7,000 back because the United States gave a $7,000 buyer tax credit if you bought a Tesla. Well, I'm a taxpayer, so I'm paying $7,000 a pop for all these people to get subsidized Teslas. I want my money back. Yeah, I built the largest non-commercial off-grid solar field in New England. I had to clear several acres to put in enough towers with enough solar modules to run my house. And people started saying, well, why do you need several acres? You can compress it into this. I said, well, we have this thing in New England they're called trees. And trees fall. And I didn't want trees falling on my towers. So I had to create a perimeter. But that's just the real world. The whole world doesn't look like the Arizona desert. I agree, you put solar modules in the Arizona desert or the outback in Australia all day long, and generate a decent amount of solar power. But not everyone lives in the desert. Some of us live in mountains, farms, areas with a lot of snow, et cetera. But I have one, and the capacity is large. I have to live with it. So it's been very interesting in terms of how you adapt your lifestyle. So what does that mean? Well, here's the thing with solar power. It works great, except at night. Solar power at night is zero because the sun's not up. Snowstorm, no power. Rainstorm, no power. Really cloudy days, no power. So you only get it when the sun shines. Okay, let's start there. And people say, well, you run your house on solar power. Actually, I don't. I run my house on batteries. The solar power charges the batteries, and then the house drains the batteries to run whatever it is. The batteries are an intermediate step between the solar modules and the light bulbs or whatever it is you're using. So what you have to do is say, well, okay, I better do the laundry, run the dishwasher, whatever it is, whatever appliances that use a lot of, run them on a sunny day because it's use it or lose it. On a sunny day, we will charge up the batteries faster than you can draw it down. But don't run the washing machine at night because that's going to drain the batteries and they're not going to get recharged until the next morning. These are simple things, but you just kind of learn to live with it. But my point is, if I have to clear 2 acres to run one house and it doesn't work at night, how are you going to run a city? And people say, oh, you're running your house on solar power. Well, they're not. What they do is these sort of salespeople come along, knock on your door, and they get you to sign up for this. Well, that solar power coming off your roof feeds to the grid. Doesn't power your house, it feeds the grid. Your house is powered by the grid, by the power company, by the electric utility. So all they're doing with meters is they're saying, how much do you contribute to the grid? How much do you take from the grid? We'll net them out and we'll either give you a reduced electric bill, or maybe we'll send you a check because you're giving us more power than we're taking. But the point is they're all connected to the grid. And when the government wants to take over the grid and expropriate your power, you can't stop them. That's why my system is off-grid. There are no points of contact. I still have the grid, but I have a master switch. I can switch between one and the other. But you can't use the grid to take my solar power because they're completely separated. But the point is, it works, and it's not economical. I won't live long enough to save enough for my electric bill to pay for the system. That's not where I did it. I did it for the day when the grid's down, and I'll still be able to, Joe Biden would say, listen to my record player. That was my motivation for it. But the point is, you can't run cities on this. Now, does it have a place? Yes. And by the way, the grid cannot rely on wind turbines and solar. Why? Because it's intermittent. Solar doesn't work at night. Solar doesn't work in bad weather. Wind doesn't work when the wind's not blowing. Now, obviously, you put your wind turbines in places where the wind blows a lot of the time, but it doesn't blow all the time. And so if you're a grid operator, your worst nightmare is that, first of all, you overload the grid and then circuit breakers go off and you get a blackout, or you don't have enough power to feed the grid and you have to go to a brownout and tell everyone to turn off the air conditioners. Those are your 2 nightmares. Well, oil, natural gas, and nuclear are very reliable sources if you're a grid operator. Wind and solar are not. And say, well, batteries. You know how expensive batteries are? I do, because I bought 20 large capacity lithium ion batteries from Sony. They're very expensive. So my batteries work fine, but that adds an enormous expense. If you say my solution to the intermittent output of solar power is batteries, get ready to, triple the cost because batteries are that expensive. And then batteries are full of poisonous chemicals. What are you going to do with those? I mean, I refer to electric vehicles as glorified golf carts, which I think is a good description. And by the way, none of this would work if it wasn't for government subsidies. Every time I see a Tesla, I want to pull the driver over and demand my $7,000 back because the United States gave a $7,000 buyer tax credit if you bought a Tesla. Well, I'm a taxpayer, so I'm paying $7,000 a pop for all these people to get subsidized Teslas. I want my money back. So, but the point is, these things are non-economic today. They get tons of government subsidies. They're not reliable because they're intermittent. Batteries are too expensive and frankly dirty. By the way, China leads the world in electric vehicles. Do you know that? I'm sure you do. More than 55% of the energy in China comes from coal-fired plants. Mm-hmm. And China's, and they buy a lot of coal from Australia, and China's building new coal-fired plants. So every time you plug in a Tesla, you might as well shovel some coal into a furnace because that's where do people think the electricity comes from? It doesn't fall out of the sky. Well, it does if it's solar, but it doesn't fall out of the sky. In China, it comes from coal-fired plants. In the United States, coal is still a significant component. It's more like 20%. It's still a significant component of our energy output. So all the electricity that goes into a Tesla comes from, for the most part, fossil fuels, oil, gas, and coal. So you're not saving any CO2 emissions. You're just moving them around. Is the planet warming? Maybe very slightly. Is that because of our CO2 emissions increasing? Yeah, that's pretty clear. Are increasing CO2 emissions the cause of a slight global warming? They really don't know because there are many other causes. The causes interact. There's some human activity that causes the planet to cool, which are aerosols. And these models, they take the surface of the Earth and they divide it into squares, and the squares are in some cases several hundred square miles, sometimes more. I did the math on this, and there's something like 3 million squares. So turn the Earth into a grid with 3 million squares. But then each square extends 30 miles into the atmosphere because that's how big the atmosphere is. So this grid, millions of items in the grid, each one 30 miles deep, divided into like 30 pancakes of 1 mile each. So again, you do this math, you're into billions of pancakes. Each one gets modeled separately. Now, any one of them, I can guarantee you, would be really hard to model because clouds tend to cool the Earth, CO2 particles tend to trap heat, et cetera. And then there are all the recursive functions where each one interacts with the one adjacent to it, the one adjacent to that, et cetera. Well, if you know anything about complexity theory, you change something something that complex, you change something in the 5th or 6th decimal place, you will radically change the outcome. It's impossible. There isn't enough computational power in the world to actually run the model. So you can't do it. So how do they do it? They make assumptions. All right, well, so this is complex enough to begin with. And by the way, what I described is exactly how it's done. It's complex enough to begin with. It exceeds the computational power of the planet Earth. So I'm going to make assumptions on something that's immensely complex to begin with. Well, now you see where the games come in, because you can fade the assumptions and you can get any result you want. Anyway, just to wrap up, Woody, the climate change is real. The Earth might be warming slightly, although that's not crystal clear. CO2 emissions are going up, but it's not clear what impact they have. The science of climate is something that deserves more research, more study, by all means. Keep working on your models till you get them right. I'm all for it. But to radically change the economy of the world and destroy the structure we've created, massive wealth transfers to emerging markets. I used to read Christine Lagarde's speeches when she was head of the IMF, because that's what I do. But I noticed every speech referred to climate change. And I was like, wait a second, you're the head of the IMF. You should worry about exchange rates and reserve positions and short-term loans and all. Why do you care about climate? Why are you even talking about climate change? And I realized that this whole climate change thing has infected the global elites. Why are they doing it? And the answer is this is part of the global elites' great reset. They want global taxation, global governance. If you have a national problem, it only calls for a national solution. So if you want a global solution, you need a global problem. Well, climate is a global issue anyway. It doesn't respect borders. That's certainly the case. So they've hijacked climate science because it's a global problem, so they can offer a global solution, which is a kind of neo-fascist global governments. That's what it's all about. Well, the bottom line is oil and natural gas are not going away. I'm not solar and wind turbine will have their place. Oil and natural gas are not going away. So when you see that sector beaten down for well-run companies, that's a good buying opportunity. At the same time, I don't doubt that you can make some money in a really well-run solar module company because it's not going away. I would steer clear of the Chinese, but Canada has a good sector. My solar modules in New England are from Canada. There may be growth in other countries, Australia and the US and others. So there are opportunities, but you have to understand the narrative, understand the hidden agendas, and not get caught up in them.